We've got just 3 episodes left, and we're looking back at the year 2019 that was in the MCU, starting with the perfectly adequate 90s throwback, Captain Marvel.
You won't last a week.
Further.
They'll never let you fly.
Faster.
This isn't a game for little girls.
Give it up.
Higher. Further. Faster. I'm kind of done with you telling me what I can't do.
Captain Marvel, rated PG-13.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at HeroPantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, here tonight we are going to be discussing Captain Marvel, a movie that came out in March of last year, and a movie that I think we are in agreement on. I think we definitely have some positive things to say about it, and I think we also have some critiques. I ultimately kind of wish that this movie was better. Not to say that this movie is bad, but where I come down on it is this, to me, is the very definition of kind of a mid-tier Marvel movie. And as a matter of fact, if I were to rank these, and we may be doing that very soon, Brian, but if I were to rank these, I would probably put this towards the middle, right about that middle spot, I think is the appropriate, because I think it is better than some Marvel movies, but it does not come anywhere near some of the top-level, Pantheon-level Marvel movies like your Captain Americas, as well as some of your Avengers movies.
Totally agree. I feel like it felt like I was watching Thor 1 on that same kind of level where they're trying to find their footing, they're trying to find the right tone, and that kind of messes with the performances a little bit because you're trying to find that balance of humor and drama, and they were kind of trying to do that at the beginning with Captain Marvel at the beginning, but I think by the end they kind of found that balance, and I think once you get towards Endgame, I think, Brie Larson is much better as Captain Marvel in Endgame, to be honest. So once you hit that third act, I felt this third time around watching it, I watched it twice in theaters, AMC Movie Pass, why not? So yeah, the third time around I'm watching it here at home, and the third act just feels like it's clicking, and everything's starting to click, and I'm starting to realize, once she realizes that she's at this past and everything, and her kind of brain kind of changes, that third act kind of gets way more full circle and feels a lot more enjoyable to watch. And by the time you at the end of the movie, it's like, okay, I get it. Like, this is the Captain Marvel that I saw in Endgame. So everything kind of felt complete. Like, at the beginning of the movie, I was kind of shaky and kind of rocky on how Brie Larson was approaching the character. She was trying to do some Deadpool type stuff with the jokes and everything, but by the end, she kind of matured her character. And right when the beginning of Endgame, when you see her, it's like 20 years later, she's rocking and ready to go, and that leader that I that kind of picture Captain Marvel to be. And that's kind of what I want for the future of the character. But it's a good start. It's a nice, little place to start with. But again, it's just some of the editing and the story choices. Again, with origin stories, it's like they have to go through so much and introduce so many different characters that sometimes you can kind of forget some things, and some things slip through the cracks. Like the fact that we didn't find out Young-Rog's name until like the end of the movie. But again, it's because of the decision of, the way they wanted to edit the movie and put the story together. But I think they tried a little too hard on that end.
So not a whole lot has changed. I know that there have been some production issues with this movie, and I think the main thing that I did just want to mention before we get into the categories is the fact that this movie did indeed make $1 billion at the box office, and the directors, Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, they are married. They will not be producing or directing the sequel to this movie. Apparently, they are looking for a female director to do the sequel to this movie. And I don't think this is something that we really discussed at the time last year. I did ask the burning question of whether these two were being groomed to take the Avengers spot, and obviously that is not going to be the case. But I think with a year perspective and seeing this movie a couple more times, I think you really see some of the flaws in the direction and some of the chaos that came with this movie. And I don't necessarily want to blame the directors, because with Marvel, it really is very much a team effort, with Kevin Feige kind of being the person in charge of these movies, and I don't think that simply throwing them under the bus is fair to them. But I have to believe that the fact that they are not coming back for the Captain Marvel sequel is at least worth mentioning, because if you look at so many of these other franchises, most of the people have at least come back to direct the second one. As we know, Ryan Coogler will be directing Black Panther 2, Jon Favreau did Iron Man 2, James Gunn did Guardians of the Galaxy 2, so there has been a trend where a lot of the directors have come back. I think Kenneth Branagh and Joe Johnston are obviously two exceptions to that, but there's no reason to think other than that Marvel perhaps was unhappy with some of the work they did. And it's really tough to blame them specifically for the issues, but from a visual standpoint and from a story standpoint, it definitely felt like this movie was missing something.
Yeah, I mean, they're credit to them. They're great indie directors, small budget scale, small scale directors. But something big like this, it's definitely an undertaking. You know what I mean? So I get why you can kind of see they took a different approach to it, and the movie feels a little different in terms of the scope and the scale of the usual Marvel movie. But that's because it's their kind of their first big, super big budget, blockbuster type movie. No pun intended. But yeah, I just it's not their fault. You know what I mean? It's they did the best that they could at the job given to them. I think so. Sometimes a different change in director is not such a bad thing, like we saw with Joe Johnson. I mean, he still did a great job with the first Avenger. I mean, I still love that movie, but the tone and the direction was completely shifted into that spy espionage stuff in the second movie. So they needed, they had a different director and everything. And sometimes that's a good thing. So I think that's what they're going for. And if they're going to still do, I don't know if it's going to be 2023 in this case in the modern MCU timeline, or they're going to go back a little bit and do the Black Widow thing and maybe even do 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. But that's kind of where I see where they're going. And if they want to do a different direction, they want a different serious tone, then maybe a different director is probably the best thing to do, because the tone that we're going for, I think that was the right move for the directors they chose. They were trying to do this origin story where you get to know the heart of the character and all these different characters, the whole female empowerment thing. So I get all that. Now you want to take that to the next level, because I feel like in Endgame they really stepped up her character, and like she showed how badass and awesome and truly powerful she is. And that's the Captain Marvel that I want to see, and kind of embrace that and be the leader. So we'll see how that director can take it. But a shift in tone is never such a bad thing.
And of course, Brian, you realize that Brie Larson filmed her role as Captain Marvel in Endgame before she did Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I know. That's why if you read some interviews and hear some interviews, she seemed a little, I don't want to say confused, but just a little backwards in terms of the approach to the character. Because if she would have filmed it back the other way around, I don't know. I just felt like she nailed it in Endgame, but then kind of went backwards a little bit. But you got to have to, because it's a character change. It's a character arc. The character has to grow from something, and that something was the memory loss and all that stuff. But just very weird that the way it kind of came around, and she even mentioned in the interview that it kind of fell backward to her. But just the way scheduling is, with the MCU, man, you got to get in there and film your stuff and get out, because everyone's got that tight schedule, and they all got to fit everyone in the same schedule with all these different actors. So it is what it is.
So I really like that Thor comparison that you made, because I think that is definitely the way that I see this movie, and it's kind of the way that I see Brie Larson's character. I don't think that it is fully formed yet, and I'm hopeful that perhaps by the second Captain Marvel movie that they have a much better idea of where they're going to take this character, her personality, the tone that they're going for. I think that one of the issues with this movie is that it really doesn't have an identity other than being a 90s throwback. And I think that is represented in this heroes category, because I think Brie Larson The unfortunate problem with Veers, Carol, Captain Marvel, whatever you want to call her, is that she doesn't really know how to define her character until the third act. And even then, in the third act, she just uses her powers. I don't think that the biggest issue to me is that we don't really see her. We see her personality at times, where she's snarky, a little bit cocky at times, and I think that those are the moments where things really shine. Is when we see her personality showcase itself, and I think the moments that don't work nearly as well is with some of that cheap pop culture feminism that I think is been a real problem for some of these superhero movies, and we'll even have a burning question about that a little bit later. And I wish that the movie had focused less on those moments. The moments I am specifically referring to is there is a moment in the movie when a biker asks her to smile, and that is just something you do not ask a woman to do. It is very sexist for a lot of different reasons. The I'm just a girl needle drop is perhaps the most infamous moment from this movie because it's such a cheap needle drop. I think even some of the flashbacks can certainly feel that way as well. There's gaslighting by Yanrog, which I actually think does work out and probably fits it best with the story, so I don't think that's necessarily a criticism. But when you put it all together, I think what you end up with is a character that is very difficult to define besides the fact that she is a female superhero, and that does not a personality make. I think the thing that has separated other more successful superhero movies and is that you have to define your characters. And I think that that's one of the things that Iron Man did so well, is that even if you don't think Iron Man is still a great movie, it very clearly defines who Tony Stark is right from the start. And I think that that is so important because whatever flaws Iron Man might have, it's still such an engaging movie because Robert Downey Jr. is very good in it. And I would argue that still might be his best. That might be his best time playing Tony Stark because they were not trying to establish a universe, and it was just Robert Downey Jr. riffing. And unfortunately, Captain Marvel by this point it has to kind of fit into a box, and I'm not talking about the Tesseract box, I'm just talking about a general box. And I think that just makes it harder to define Brie Larson's character because she is being integrated into a universe that has so many characters, so many plot lines going on. And it's really, really unfortunate to me that Brie Larson did not have more of a chance to embrace the Harrison Ford in her. I think that's a lot of what she was going for. A little bit of detachment, but still engaged. And I really like those moments. I love her smirks, and I really like a lot of what she is doing. But it just feels like the movie around her isn't nearly as good.
Yeah, I mean, she does a solid job in the performance. I just feel like, I don't know, the way that they approached the story really affected the way that we take her character, like, because everything is so confusing in the first act. The way she's portraying everything, it seems so like she doesn't know who she is even like herself, so it's hard to define her character because even she doesn't even know who she is. And I don't know if that was purposeful or reflecting like the narrative that her arc is going through. Yeah, at one point, even in the first act, like Talos even tells her, like, "Man, they really messed you up. You're all scrambled. No wonder you don't know anything." And I'm just thinking, like, yeah, maybe that's why she doesn't know she doesn't know her characteristics. She doesn't know. She's just throwing out one liners here and there, trying to do like these Deadpool type lines. But then she's trying to be this badass, but what's this history of her being a badass and what's really her history? And then when you go into her history, it's just like she's a pilot and she's done all this basic training, but she's not really like this soldier or anything like that. She's a test pilot, so it's the way they put it all together. I don't know. They should have done a little more. I mean, I know they did delve into her backstory a little bit with her parents, but I felt like there should have been more. I don't know, with her actual family and kind of get to know her character a little bit as a kid. I mean, we know that she doesn't quit, but why doesn't she want to quit? You know what I mean? Was it because of that accident? Did that accident as a kid when she's riding that go-kart really affect her that much? Maybe delve into that. And then once you get to the psyche, I think that's when you get really to the heart of the character and get, really that connection. Because like with Thor, when I was making that comparison, you really didn't get that probably until, I don't know, for me a little bit and Thor 2 a little bit. and then a little bit in Ultron, but you really got that in Ragnarok, that deep connection to Thor, right? So it just takes some time and the right writer to kind of delve into that, because I think once you dig in to really her motivations, like what does she really want to do, is like, because by the end of the movie you can tell she feels this guilt, but like she doesn't really express this guilt. She just says, "I'm going to find you a new homeland." But really, it's like the reason she's really finding the homeland is because she feels guilty for killing all these innocent, I guess, quote unquote, scrolls throughout the years. So I just feel like her character seems lost a little bit, but they didn't know really how to approach it, because they wanted to kind of reflect this confusion and emphasize this confusion about her background. That kind of really affected the way we, I don't know, try to connect with the character, because if she's confused, then the audience is confused, so it's really hard to connect. But like I said, that third act kind of picks it up a little bit, and then you get a little of that connection that I was talking about. That I really enjoyed, that more of that deeper connection to the character in Endgame by the end, when she was just going toe to toe with Thanos. So um, it's a little bit of a rough start, but I think they got the time to build up, and it just takes some time a little bit. I mean, it took Thor like 3 movies to finally get to that emotional point where you just love the guy. So I think we'll get there, because I still think, like, based on like some of the reactions I've read and like some online reviews and stuff, a lot of females still dig Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. So I think she's here to stay for a long time, and they just got to build that character up.
No, I 100% this movie, Brie Larson should absolutely continue to play this character. And let's be clear, this movie made $1 billion, so it was very financially successful. They certainly have a lot of work to do on the creative end, but the positive thing is that they do have some rope to work with. So I think that's a hugely positive thing. Let's talk about some of the other characters. I think some of the best scenes, in fact, are when Carol Danvers is interacting with Monica Rambeau and her daughter Maria. And one of the things that we know is that Maria is going to play a much bigger role in future Marvel projects. I believe that she is going to be a part of the WandaVision television series, and we'll see how that all works out. And they've casted a new person to play that role. But I think when you talked about the connections, even if you don't necessarily, I think that one of the big problems that Marvel has had is that a lot of their characters kind of have daddy issues. And I would very much like to stay away from that as much as humanly possible, because the one time that we see Captain Marvel have a negative interaction with a family member, it is with her father. And I would really prefer to just stay away from that as much as possible, because, as you know, Brian, there's been issues with Iron Man and his father, and with Peter Quill and his father, and I would just prefer to stay away from that. To me, I think the more interesting angle is to focus on the found family, and that would be Monica Rambeau and her daughter. I think those are, again, some of the best scenes, because there is that human interaction, and I think that Marvel could stand to do a lot more of this, to humanize their characters. This is a critique that I'm going to return to next week when we talk about Spider-Man Far From Home. But I think that we cannot lose sight of the fact that Marvel characters are humans who become superpowered. That is very different than DC characters who are gods. And I think that Shazam, a movie that we reviewed a couple weeks ago, I think the reason that that movie works a little bit better than this one is because Shazam has a relationship. Billy Batson has a relationship with his found family, and it is such a focal point that it actually pays off in the end. We don't really get that here. We don't have Monica Rambeau being a part of the action at the very end. She's just kind of there, and that's really unfortunate. But like I said, I think that I appreciate the fact that they did have her around. I just wish there was more.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but at least she did have that moment in the pilot. Is it Maria, the mom? Yeah, the mom, and she had that moment on the pilot, and she fucking did that 360 and fooled that lady and fucking just annihilated her. That was a cool Top Gun-esque moment. So credit to her for that when she had her little shining moment there. But I get what you're saying. But it was a little tease here and there for the daughter. I didn't really pick up on that she was like some other character. I found out after I saw the first time. And I looked it up, and like I guess they were planting those seeds. And then you hear the stuff about Young Avengers and the rumors about, what we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp and all that stuff with Casey. So, they know what they're doing, and they're probably thinking like 10 years down the line even. So that's probably why they did that. And of course, we're gonna get that little tease in WandaVision and see how far that goes. But I like what they did there, and I hope that they kind of build on that and get more into that because I felt like they had that one scene at the beginning in the flashback where they called her Captain Trouble or whatever, or Lieutenant Trouble or whatever, and you never got like an origin story as to why that or some kind of like connection. Like I wanted more of like, Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers and the daughter, because that's a nice little relationship there. But they only had like a 10-second scene, and then they had to build on that from a flashback to where they were now, and like I missed you and blah blah blah. But we never got to really see that relationship and the reason like she really missed her and why did she save all her stuff and why is all her stuff in their house. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So it's kind of like this empty backstory that they kind of glossed over that I wish they kind of went over a little bit more, like the way they did in Shazam and built those relationships. But again, this movie was like 2 hours and 10 minutes, and they got to cram all this other stuff and all the cosmic stuff as well. So I see why they had to do that, but it's unfortunate they couldn't take their time a little bit more on those. But I enjoyed them a lot. So. And especially like we joke about the farm stuff in all these Marvel movies, but man, they had a really great farm scene in the middle, so that really picked things up and that kind of turned things around in the movie. I felt so.
I think we have to talk about Samuel L. Jackson. We're 20 minutes of this show, and we haven't even mentioned Samuel L. Jackson as young and vibrant Nick Fury. And I think his scenes with Carol Danvers are very good as well. We get a little bit of spy stuff with the tape, and we get some shenanigans as they exchange some personal info. We get just him interacting and it kind of becomes a buddy cop movie at certain points. And I think Samuel L. Jackson is just good. I like the fact that he's a little bit looser than we see him in other Marvel movies, and the fact that he is not as bitter and cynical. And I just think that what he does as Nick Fury in this movie works. And there really isn't a lot else to say about it, because I think we know Nick Fury pretty well by this point. And we do get a little bit of that extra information to kind of enhance his character. But I think the thing, when Samuel L. Jackson is at his best, I think is when he is playing in a more supporting role. And as a lead, I think it's very much a mixed bag. I think he's been in a lot of really bad movies. But I think when he's playing a supporting character in a movie like this, I think this is where he really gets to shine, because he could come in, he makes his jokes, makes his smart-ass comments, maybe has a good line or two, maybe a good monologue, and that's it. And that was perfect. The one thing I will say, the thing that I feel did not work was the Avengers name. It just comes off really goofy, and I'm really tired of origin movies having to explain literally everything. This very much reminded me of the moment in Solo when Han Solo got his name, and the fact that the Avengers got their name because it was Carol Avenger Danvers. That was really goofy. I did not like that.
Yeah, I think that's the Family Guy joke, right? You said it, where they say the name in the movie. I think he was making fun of a Tom Hanks movie, but that's the first joke that came to mind. But yeah, Sam Jackson, man, he did good, but I felt like his best moments were with the cat. To be honest, something about Goose and him, like as much as we've seen Samuel L. Jackson say fuck and kill people and do crazy shit and tear people up with lightsabers and all these crazy things over his career, being Shaft, right? Just him interacting with a cat, and I was just like, wow, he's doing simple things here, and he's making it work for a casual audience. And I was like, okay, because I mean, I'm watching this stuff with the cat, and the way he's like had these facial reactions, and he's selling it very well, man. And by the end of the movie, I love the build up with him and the origin story of the eye, and that was kind of one of the teases going into this movie. What's the origin of his eye, and are they going to tell it, and what happened, and blah blah blah. And then it becomes like in wrestling, almost like I always try to bring it back to wrestling, but like urban legends just kind of spread and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it kind of starts with Coulson. Coulson thinks that he got it from being tortured by the Skrulls, and they took out his eye. So he didn't respond, and I guess, he let him assume whatever, and then the legend just spreads and grows. So I love that idea of, because everyone had their theories going in of like what's going to happen with his eye and like how did he lose it and blah blah blah. Does it have to do with Budapest? He did mention Budapest, by the way, but that's probably something he probably went to Budapest before Black Widow. But yeah, I just thought that nice little build to the story was good, and it was something so simple. And then the way Talos and his wife give him this look like, dude, your eye's gone. Like they just shake their head and just like, You have no idea. And I thought that was a nice little touch. And then Goose coughing up the Tesseract at the end was pretty funny. So I thought he did a good job. He was being serious. He was having fun. And it's nice to see him do that because we're so used to seeing him being, straight, hard-laced, badass Nick Fury, the one that faked his death in Winter Soldier. So we've seen him do everything in the MCU, and it's nice to see him in this different tone. And I can't believe the dude's 70, pulling off 50 in this. I guess he would be 50 or something like that in '95. And they did a hell of a job with the CGI, man. So I'll give him credit for that and the nice little touch with the hair. Although I wish they kind of made him look like a little bit more like Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction, just to pop me.
Yes, because that's what it's all about. It's all about popping you. Just as Stanley's moment reading the Mallrats script was a huge moment for you, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, we got to mention too the opening credits. Stanley, that was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did that last year when we did our original podcast, and yeah, I mean, people are in tears just before the movie even starts because of that tribute. So we have to talk about Ben Mendelsohn, and perhaps the most surprising aspect of this is that we are talking about him in the hero category and not the villain category. Some pretty brilliant work by Marvel to cast Ben Mendelsohn and basically promote him as the villain of the movie, but what a twist! In fact, he's a protagonist. He is playing Talos, and he is a key role, of course. But we believe that he is on Earth for evil reasons. But it is eventually revealed that he is a refugee trying to be a hero and save his family, as we learn towards the second half of the movie. And I have to give Marvel some credit. Casting Ben Mendelsohn in this role was pretty brilliant because he just is evil. He sounds evil. He kind of looks evil. And the way that they play with that, I give them a lot of credit for really handling that well. And Brian, I do want to say, hashtag not all scrolls.
Yeah, they fooled us, man, because comics, cartoons, the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years, Skrulls have always been the heels, the bad guys. They switched it up on us, and that was great because it throws all your expectations out the window. Because going in, I bet like a lot of hardcore comic book fans try to figure out the Skrull invasion and who's a Skrull and whatever. Hell, I was doing that. I was accusing Captain America being a Skrull for 3 years, doing my conspiracy theory stuff, and I guess I gave up on that. But for now, but yeah, the total, complete 180, and I was just like, the first time I watched it, I was like, this is genius. And then when he says the word refugee, everything just clicked in my head. I was like, oh my God, they're doing a refugee storyline. That's perfect. That's something that world history, and that's something straight out of world history, like a refugee nation being outcasted and their homeland taken away, and the wars and fighting back. And I mean, I'm not going to mention specific countries, man, but yeah, that's definitely reflective of modern times, even. So I thought that was brilliant, just the way that they did that. And man, he's so good as Talos. I want Talos as like an Avenger, like full on, because like he is so entertaining in that role. He's having fun too, you can tell. And then when he's the good guy and he's being like the father figure, you see him with his family for the first time. You don't even realize he has a family until that moment, and then when everything just starts clicking in your head, like he was doing this for his family, he was doing this for his whole people, like all those people come out. I mean, to me, like, I don't know, he really makes the hero score for me because I feel like he's just as important as Captain Marvel in this movie. He is such an important character. I don't want to say good human being, but he's a good soul. You know what I mean? Despite all the stuff he's done, and he's even admitted like the war has made him do questionable things, and we've both done questionable things. So that was him kind of telling Captain Marvel that, yeah, I kind of forgive you for what you've done, if you can forgive me for what I've done. So they kind of had that mutual respect and understanding. So I thought that was really great towards the end. So for me, overall, everything put together, I'm going to give it a 7. I almost gave it an 8 because of Talos, but man, I just want more Ben Middleton. I mean, the fact that he came back in Spider-Man 2, 3 months later, that really got me. You want to talk about popping me? That popped me hard because, like, fuck, dude, that means we're gonna get more of him. And the fact that he was covering up as Samuel L. Jackson, I mean, or as Fury, that just opens up the door to more possibilities. So, him having that ability opens up a lot of doors and a lot of possibilities. And he's such a great actor, man. Have him come back and do more stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with you that I think in some ways it's unfortunate that Talos gets to be a more fully realized character than Carol Danvers because even though there is a twist involving his character as well, we do kind of get to know who he is as a person, and it's not black and white. There is some shades of gray thrown in there in a positive way. And I agree with you on the score of a 7. I think it ultimately does come up short for me. And I think if Carol Danvers had been more fully realized, I think I would have been willing to give this an 8. But this is definitely my highest category at a 7 because I think it gets a little weaker as we go along. Let's talk about the villains. Jude Law as Yanrog. I think he is at first portrayed as a mentor to Veers. We get a double turn in this movie as it is revealed that Talos is ultimately a good guy and Yanrog is revealed to be the main villain of this movie, as a matter of fact. And really, we get a lot of gaslighting between him and Veers. He is basically an imperialist, and that is the way that it is portrayed. And I think Jude Law is good in this role. I would not put him at the bottom. I think that there's a lot of villains that would go to the bottom of the barrel. I'm thinking of Thor: The Dark World 2. I'm thinking of even Guardians of the Galaxy with Korath and Ronan, who are in this movie as well. But this is definitely not up at the higher tier either. This is not. We're not talking about Loki, Thanos, or Vulture. I would probably slot him again, just like this movie. I kind of slot Yanrog right in the middle of the villain category.
Yeah, I wasn't really a big fan of his performance at all. I thought he was just kind of playing it safe and by the numbers. And I mean, by the first 5 minutes, I figured like, okay, what's up with this? Because he seems like a dick, and he's trying to hold her back. Because like she's clearly got all these powers, but he's like, I don't want you to use them during battle. I'm like, what do you? That sounds stupid. Of course, you wanted her to use her powers at full power during battle, so she can kick ass and limit, casualties on your side. So I was like, okay, what's the deal here? Why are you trying to hold her back? And then you see the thing on her neck. I was like, okay, I get it. You're holding her back, and then by halfway through, you figure out it's the gaslighting thing, and he's just being a total male. I wouldn't say chauvinistic, but probably he is a chauvinist. This type of character, I'm just gonna assume, but total dick, man. And I just felt like at least by the end, they didn't do that stupid thing where he says, show me your power without, using your actual powers. Fight me with your fists or whatever. And she just fucking does the Indiana Jones. If you want to talk about that Harrison Ford comparison, she did the straight up Indiana Jones. Like, I'm not going to fight you. I'm just going to shoot you. Bam. That was it. And I thought that was really cool. But it just showed how weak as a villain he is overall, I think. Because all he is just a lying son of a bitch. And that's really... I felt like the villain needed to be more in this. And if Talos was indeed going to be the villain, then yeah, the villain score would have been a lot higher for me. But because everyone is just, and kind of just a side crew that kind of doesn't really get to do much, even with the return of Diamond Hansu. But yeah, I just felt like there's something lacking, and especially with like Gemma Chan, she's really good and she was really great in Crazy Rich Asians, and then this was kind of like, she just made some jokes about Earth and that was it, and how they didn't really get along between her and Captain Marvel. We didn't really know why. They just said, "Oh, how come we never hung out?" Like, well, we didn't know that they didn't hung out. You know what I mean? We didn't get to know them as a group, so that was kind of unfortunate. So for me, I'm giving it a 5. Low for me, and I just felt like Yon-Rogg was just totally forgettable, and you don't even hear his name until towards the end of the movie. I think they say Veers like 20 times in this movie, but they only say Yon-Rogg like once or twice.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. Just the idea of them naming her Veers, her former name was Carol Danvers. I mean, you're making it pretty obvious. You'd think Yanrog would have a much better plan in order to specifically hide her identity. So I guess you could say that is another knock. Digimon Hansu and Lee Pace both playing the same characters as they did in Guardians of the Galaxy, Korath and Ronan. Somehow they get even less to do in this movie than they did in Guardians of the Galaxy. They teased a sequel that would involve them. I'm really not sure what Captain Marvel 2 is going to look like, because I have a feeling that they might be shifting their plans a little bit based on some of the rumors and some of what's been going on elsewhere in the MCU. I agree with you about Gemma Chan. I think she's unfortunately window dressing, and I am really glad that she is going to be a part of another part of the MCU. I believe that she is going to be in the Eternals, and that will be a lot of fun. My villain score is a 5. Also.
Yeah, with the Gemma Chan thing, it's just, I feel like if you're that good of an actor and you can portray different characters, I'm trying to think of the actor's name from Deadwood, but you know who I'm talking about, the guy who killed that woman in the I think the second season. They came back in the third season as someone else. If you can pull it off,
Yeah, I mean they've done, they do it a lot in TV shows. They'll have a, all of a sudden they'll have a mysterious twin brother or sister depending on the original gender of someone they killed off. So it is certainly something that they have done in the past to get around the fact that they really like specific characters and specific people.
yeah, I mean we saw it with Diamond Hunsu in the DCEU, and hell, he came back here. So I mean, I'm all for if you got a good actor that can portray different types of characters, man, go for it. Paint them up in different makeup and whatever. I'm for that because sometimes you gotta just I don't know. When I saw that in Deadwood, I know we're kind of getting sidetracked, but when I saw that in Deadwood, like I was like, wow, like you can have a lot of possibilities with like one actor to do all these different things. Peter Sellers, for instance.
For sure, that is quite the comparison. Let's get to the story. I think the story is very convoluted at times, and I think that the movie is actually weakest in Act One when Veers doesn't really know who she is, and there's just something about the stuff that takes place in space that feels very flat. And I think part of that is the fact that Marvel, of course, shoots so much of their movies in Atlanta on a soundstage. But there's just something about this movie compared to Thor Ragnarok and of course Guardians of the Galaxy that there is a notable lack of personality, of color, especially to Act One, and it really doesn't feel like the movie picks up until they get to actual places and spaces in Los Angeles. When they get into the 1990s Earth, as of course she goes and falls through a blockbuster. I don't know. There was something about the rewatch where it felt like things were getting a little too cutesy with the references. The internet is crappy and slow, the needle drops, the blockbuster. I really do think that Act Two is where this movie shines most. When we see her interacting with her best friend, with Fury, we realize the Skrulls are the good guys. I think that is when when this movie really sings. I know that you are a big fan of Act Three. I'm not as much of a fan of Act Three, particularly because of the I'm the Girl needle drop, which I think does some damage for me as far as my enjoyment of that scene. And to me, it just feels like it's kind of this generic action scene because we haven't really done a good job of building up the villains, so it's really hard to get as invested in the final battle as one should. I think the best moment of Act 3 ultimately is when Captain Marvel faces off with Yon-Rogg, and Yon-Rogg seemingly wants to have a fair fight, and Captain Marvel is like, nope, fuck, and just blasts him. And that is a genuinely cathartic moment that really serves to pay off their earlier relationship. And I really did appreciate that. But for me, I think the story is just kind of up and down.
Yeah, I mentioned this last year, but I felt like the first act should have been in order a little bit more. Like it probably should have just opened up with her at the academy or as a kid and that accident and go from there. And I know sometimes I mentioned before that you can be creative and go out of order as long as it helps the storytelling. But in this case, them going out of order just made it even more confusing and not knowing what the hell is going on, and then kind of just throwing the general audience into this whole like cosmos aspect of the MCU when I felt like it should open up on Earth. It kind of did open up on Earth, but again, it was a dream on when she was on on that alien planet. I forget the planet's name, but still, like she, it still opens up in space pretty much. You know what I mean? It should have opened up on Earth in '89 or whatever, and then with the crash and everything, it happened kind of linearly. If it happens more linear, I think it would be more understanding and figuring out what the hell is going on. Shazam went in order and it was fine. So it just went a little too long in the beginning, but going in order did help the narrative. So I think in this case it should have went in order. And I mentioned the third act being really good because I felt like it had those payoff moments, like she does the Indiana Jones thing, just shoots him. And then there's this moment that I really loved, which was Talos and Nick Fury, right? Because in the middle of the movie, Talos is trying to play him, and he's in the director role, and he's portraying the human. And he goes up to Fury, and he calls him Nicholas, right? And then no one calls Nick Fury Nicholas. And then he mentions the Havana move, which is some bullshit thing he makes up just to trick him. And then when, he turns into that guard at the end of the movie, and then he goes up to Fury when they're being caught, and he's like, just like Havana. And then I was like, oh, it's Talos. That's the clue. So they're playing with that technique of like, callbacks basically to what he was saying earlier to give you that clue to know that he is Talos, and they were playing with that. And then the stuff with the cat again, just out of nowhere because they build it up like Talos is scared, like that's a flirkin or whatever. And what the hell are you talking about? It's just a cat, and they make the joke, and they put the Hannibal Lecter mask on him, and then all of a sudden in the third act he's eating all these people. So that was a great little twist. So everything kind of came full circle. It just took a while to get there. So just that jumbled first part. The stuff in the middle was cool. I thought it was kind of funny to see all these LA locations in like modern era when it didn't look like in the 90s like that. So it was like, oh wow, what station is this? I look it up. It's the Green Line. The Green Line doesn't even connect to the Blue Line, which is where she gets off, which is I think Seventh and Metro or something, which connects to the Red Line. So I don't even know how she did that because if she stayed on one subway, she would have not made it all the way to 7th and Metro from the Green Line. I'm just saying. I'm just being observant, people, because I rode the subway. I don't ride it now, obviously, with the pandemic, but I know my subways, and there's no way she couldn't have got from that point to that point with that subway line. But the stuff with Stanley in the middle with the Mallrats stuff, oh man, that was great because that was a double whammy. Because if you're a Kevin Smith fan, Stan Lee fan, that made it all worthwhile. So for me, I'm gonna go with a six, unfortunately, because the beginning was messed up. The second act was kind of whatever, but that third act had some payoffs.
I would certainly agree with you on the story. I'm also giving it a six. And you mentioned the problem with the subways. I mean, what about Stan Lee reading a Mallrats script? I mean, is Stan Lee the Stan Lee from? Did he create Marvel? Did he make Pirates? I mean, what is the deal here? Like, what is the situation if Stan Lee is not creating Marvel? Like, what is his role in this universe?
Trust me, that question gets more complicated when you watch Jay and Silent Bob Reboot when Kevin Smith exists in the Kevin Smith universe.
I mean, I know why that happened because Kevin Smith was high. I can very clearly delineate the differences there.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it's a trip to think about, honestly, too, because who would have thought something so insignificant and the fact that they would even bring Kevin Smith into the MCU? I guess they just love him that much, even though they won't give him like a big time job.
I think from a technical standpoint, I think this is pretty much a paint by the numbers, generic looking Marvel movie. And a year of hindsight makes it quite clear that I think these directors would have been much better doing other things and not necessarily this movie. And I think that's really unfortunate to say, but I just, the technical aspects of this movie are just mostly unimpressive. And I think the score does have some highlights. I think the main Captain Marvel score actually does work. I do not like the needle drops. I don't know. There's just something about the needle drops in this specific context that don't work. There's something about where it works in Guardians of the Galaxy, the way that James Gunn is able to execute it. It feels much more organic and natural than it does here. And I think they're just really forcing this 90s kind of ambiance to it, and I don't think it worked. I did appreciate some of the creative use of flashbacks in that they did have an origin story, as this does function as one, but they flashback in creative ways. I love the editing trick, especially in the scene with Lawson and Carol Danvers. I really like the visuals and kind of how that all worked out. So I think the visuals are a mixed bag, but I ultimately came down on giving this also a 6.
I enjoyed the 90s throwback look. I mean, I was tripping out because I worked at Blockbuster. Even in 2006, it still looked like the same thing, except we had DVDs instead of VHS. And, just seeing those popcorn buckets again, man, and the same end cap, and the same, I don't know how they got the same end caps, but I guess they watched the old Blockbuster commercial and just copied it. But damn, I was having flashbacks of putting a stock of popcorn and candy, and then my manager being like, "You had a good day, take a prize," and I would take some candy at the end of the night, just have a fake receipt. But those were the days, you know what I mean? So, in terms of the score and the needle drops, I had the same feeling. They were just kind of forcing it. They would have been more bold if they didn't pick "I'm Just a Girl" and they went with "No, Don't Speak," which is even the bigger hit from No Doubt. And I know I'm gonna go and throwback '90s stuff, but I'm a big fan of the '95 No Doubt album and the 2000 album. I think it's Tragic Kingdom is '95. I forget the name of the album from 2000, but those are my kind of two favorite No Doubt eras or albums. And if they went with No Don't Speak and have this dramatic like song playing in the background, I think that would have been even weirder and more effective. Have that Tarantino kind of effect where you put it seems like the wrong song for the wrong tone, but it kind of fits. And I was thinking, like, if you're gonna go with this Top Gun thing, because they even picked that guy that looked like Tom Cruise in the flashbacks. If you're gonna go with that Top Gun thing, might as well pick Berlin Take My Breath Away, right? And just play that at the most inopportune, like play that during the fight sequences, and I guarantee you'll have a bigger reaction. Because Take My Breath Away during a fight sequence, like that's so odd. but it would have worked, I think, because sometimes that odd kind of needle drop works better than the most obvious forced kind, like in this situation. So, although the look at the beginning of the movie with the space stuff wasn't as good, I thought that thing where she finally gets her powers and blows up the ship at the end and just destroys everything, and they're playing those the Captain Marvel theme, and the Captain Marvel theme is pretty cool because they're really emphasizing these drums. I don't know if you heard the drums, but the drums like really sound great. And then when you hear the drums in Endgame, it all comes full circle again. So I thought that was really well done. And overall, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I like the that ship sequence even more than you did probably, because I was going for 7, but I saw that ship sequence again, and she was just destroying everything, and the music was blasting, and everything was just working. So I'm going with 8 out of 10.
The legacy of this movie is, it's always tough to evaluate what the legacy of a movie like this is going to be just 1 year later. I feel pretty confident that this movie is going to almost be forgotten, especially if Captain Marvel 2 turns out really well. And I think that this is a movie that is going to have a legacy because it is an important step. It is always going to be the first Marvel movie to have a female superhero in the lead role. I think that's something that's super important. It did $1 billion. It was very successful. It proved that Ike Perlmutter is a fucking repulsive human being. So that obviously is important to me. I think Brie Larson's legacy is still TBD. I think we still have to see her in more stuff because I don't think it would necessarily be fair to evaluate Chris Hemsworth's legacy after the first Thor because, spoiler alert, that movie is not very good. And I think Chris Hemsworth now in 2020 has a very different perception than he did in 2014-15. So I think we still have to kind of evaluate. I feel comfortable giving this a 7 just because of how successful this movie was and the legacy that it leaves for young girls wanting to actually be Avengers. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna recount this little story. Like when my friend I mentioned last week or last week's episode that he was in a major car accident, right? And in the hospital, he would talk with the nurses and whatever, and he was trying to, especially the pretty nurses, he would tell me, right? But pretty much every nurse, when they talked about Marvel movies, they all mentioned how they loved Captain Marvel, and he wasn't really a big fan of the movie. But all these like female nurses, and then I went online, kind of looked it up, and there's like a female, like a big following of like female, not necessarily nerds, but like even casual movie goers that are fans of Brie Larson and Captain Marvel. So I think that $1 billion is kind of significant of what it transcends. Because I think if you hit 650, 700, you're hitting that casual comic book usual audience, right? The DC kind of hits, even with their worst movies. I think you got to transcend that when you do like $1 billion, especially if it's like a Black Panther where it transcends to a different audience. And this felt like it transcended to the casual audience, the casual female audience that, date night movie kind of thing, PG-13. This was the kind of audience that, Birds of Prey wanted, you know what I mean? And this was able to get the billion. So I thought it transcended to the casual audience really well, and it really, more so than the cat. Like it did way more into the public consciousness than an Ant-Man movie. I think, you know what I mean. So I think it did a lot of good and a lot for the long term, and a lot of payoffs in Endgame as well. So, and then the little tease at the end, we got to mention the end credit scene of her coming back after the the snap. So for me, I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10 because of the money and the way I felt it kind of, transcended into a different audience. Anytime you get a Marvel movie that goes into that general audience past the usual, MCU fan base, I think you did even a better job. So that's why I'm giving it an 8.
My total score is a 31, and yours is.
34.
So I think this indeed puts it right along with so many of the other Marvel movies that we have reviewed that are not in the pantheon. I think a 67 to a 70, that is about the range that I would have expected for a movie like this. And what I want to do now is get into the burning questions. How do you feel about the directors Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck being replaced for the sequel?
I'm not saying it's a negative, you know what I mean? I think just, a shift in tone is what they need, and sometimes different directors have a different tone. But I think they should still keep them around. I think they'd be perfect for She-Hulk. I think that's the right way to go. She-Hulk is more of like a crime. She's a lawyer anyway, right? And if they're going to do it as a show on Disney Plus, I think that's the right fit to do it. I'm not sure who the showrunner was announced to be, but if you can get them on board, I think that's the right fit because still that female lead character, smaller budget, smaller world, something that they have more control over. It's more up their alley, so that's what I expect more out of them.
I think it would be very interesting to see what these two directors. I hope that they are able to successfully extricate themselves and go back to doing the kind of work that they would be more interested in doing. And maybe superhero movies are not for them, and that's perfectly acceptable. I don't think that every director has to box themselves into these kinds of movies, and I almost wonder if they would be better off just in doing other things. Brian, very important. Rank the pop feminism moments in order of most cringy to least cringy. I'm Just a Girl, Needle Drop, the women coming together in Avengers Endgame, no Black Widow, or Jennifer Lawrence's line in Dark Phoenix. So give me your most cringy first.
Most cringy is probably the X-Men Dark Phoenix line with Jennifer Lawrence because that seemed forced, even more forced than out of nowhere. Because I was like, I had to think about that because there's been so many movies. In the middle, I would go with the Endgame one because as it visually was fucking cool, but then it feels like it was missing definitely Black Widow. But again, it was like, man, they were all standing there at the same time. Like, what kind of happenstance is that? And then the needle drop. Yeah, I'm Just a Girl, and I mentioned that they probably would have been even bolder if they went with a different song, no doubt. Take My Breath Away, what have you. The one other needle drop I forgot to mention is it was so weird that remember she's visiting the higher power or whatever, and then they start playing Nirvana, right? She disappeared from Earth in '89. She has no idea what "Come as You Are" sounds like. So how does she even know how to project that song in her brain? That had me confused.
I mean, maybe Nirvana's playing on intergalactic radio or whatever the equivalent is. Maybe, I don't know. But that is a good point that you raise, and so my rankings, I agree with you. I think Jennifer Lawrence's line in Dark Phoenix is appallingly bad, and I have to give that the number one prize. Number two for me is the needle drop. I really don't like it, and the women coming together in Avengers Endgame just annoys me more and more every time I see it, but it's still going to be number three on this list. What do you want to see out of a Captain Marvel sequel? We mentioned they raised the possibility of it kind of being another prequel, but for me, what I would almost rather them see them do is to just fast forward to modern times. I have zero interest in engaging with any of the villains in this movie, and I would rather them go and explore new territory in modern times and especially get into whatever Nick Fury was doing in the post-credit sequence of Spider-Man Far From Home.
That's kind of what I want to. I want like the first 15 minutes to kind of sum up all this past shit and all that shit that's been going on the ship with Fury and all the stuff with Talos and kind of bring it up to 2023 and build on some of that stuff because I felt like they even at that I don't know the 20-30 minute mark we saw Captain Marvel with the short hair at the beginning of Endgame and she is a straight up Avenger in that movie and I want more of her being an Avenger and being her. I mean obviously she's been an Avenger in that post snap world over what 5 years, so there's a lot of growth there. So she's got to be the captain, right? She's Captain Marvel. I want to see her be that captain of a team or something. You know what I mean? Lead a cosmic team, something like that, built to an Avengers movie. I just want it cosmic. I want her to be, even more mature and badass. Give me that, 'cause, man, that 5 minutes against Thanos, she showed so much leadership and all that stuff. And, like, she went up to Spider-Man. It was like, let me handle this. That was great. So, I want more of that.
Agree with you on all counts. Here's a prediction for you, Brian. You get to go into your crystal ball. Will Captain Marvel be the leader of the Avengers team, and should she be?
I've been debating this because I keep thinking it's like a three-way tie between her, Black Panther, and Spider-Man, right? Those are like the three top picks for me, or the obvious picks at least right now. I don't think Bucky or um, Falcon are at that level to be a leader, but they'll have their story on Disney Plus. But those are like the three, to me at least, big franchises. Spider-Man did 1 billion, Black Panther did 1 billion, Captain Marvel did 1 billion. So those are your big three right now. If I were to pick personally, I would say Black Panther, just because he's an actual king and a leader. He knows what he's doing. You want more of a tactical approach, you go with Captain Marvel. Do not have Spider-Man as the leader, man. That kid does not know what he's doing. He gave away all the power to Mysterio halfway through his movie. He's just going to make bad decisions. Let him be the second in command and just have him follow whatever orders. Because that kid will not only spoil the Marvel movie for you on the press tour, but he'll probably help the villain in some weird way.
I think Captain Marvel is going to be the leader of the Avengers team. I think that is the direction that they are going in. And should she be? I don't know. I think that there is a legitimate debate between her and Cat and Black Panther. I don't even know if Spider-Man is going to continue to be a part of the MCU. We will have to see how that all develops. The most important question: are we going to see the? Are we going to get the scrolls? Any Phase 4 movie? This might be pretty important to you, Brian. I have a feeling that we're going to get a tease, but I don't think that we're going to get a lot of the scrolls in Phase 4. It just feels like they are doing other things in some of these movies, and it doesn't feel like we're going to get a lot of scroll action going on.
Yeah, based on the turn, because they're not the main focus of being this, big endgame villain type, right? Um, but there's like I said, I love Talos, bring him back, but there's always gonna be rogues, right? There's always gonna be those rogues that go against the grain and don't agree with Talos and wants to take it even to the more extremes. You know what I mean? So there's always going to be those types, and you can always, I've read about the character, the Super Scroll. I mean, you can even do a character switch. Like maybe there's a reason that he didn't want his daughter to see him kill that person. All of a sudden, the daughter looks and still sees him kill that person at the end of the movie. Maybe there's a little Easter egg there, or maybe that was just a little character thing. But maybe the daughter ends up being a Super Scroll or something like that down the line, and then Talos has to go against her own daughter, and it creates this conflict. You know what I mean? Something like that. That would be really interesting. Do it like a personal story, but also kind of reflect the struggles of being a refugee civilization on the run and finally establishing a homeland all these years later that you don't necessarily agree with or something like that. Do something kind of sophisticated and brilliant the way they switched up on us like that. So that's how I want the approach to be with the scrolls, man. Just take it with this modern kind of political, social political approach to it. Without saying overtly what the countries are supposed to be or whatever symbolically, but I like that twist to it, and you can kind of bring it into the modern world politics.
Yeah, I don't know how you have the scrolls be the heroes of this movie and also have involvement in Spider-Man, and then all of a sudden they're the bad guys in another movie. I think you really have to do some legwork before you get into that, and it would be very, very curious to see because I believe we are going to finally get an introduction into multiverses with both WandaVision and the next Doctor Strange movie. So I think that is the direction that we are going in. I have no doubt that we are going to get Secret Wars at some point, but I don't think it's going to be for a few years. I think that may be the next big Thanos event, and it took 10 years to get there, so I think we are many, many years away from that. And that pretty much concludes our conversation on Captain Marvel, and I'm really glad that we had a chance to kind of talk about it. We did have a conversation last year, but I think we just know more about the movie and we're able to rewatch it and process it differently. So, Brian, next week we're going to be reviewing Spider-Man Far From Home, and I've got a spicy take for you. I think it might be, if not my least favorite, one of my least favorite MCU movies upon rewatch.
Yeah, and I gave you that Andre the Giant shocked look gif when you put that on Twitter, so we'll see. I mean, I saw it 3 times in theaters, like literally 3 days in a row with 3 different people, because just friends have different schedules, right? And I had the movie pass. But I still thoroughly enjoyed it. But I did have some real strange issues with Mysterio. I don't know if it's Mysterio that you have the issues with in particular, but I thought it was a little hokey with him in the middle when he was just explaining everything to his coworkers that they all knew the plan already, so why the fuck are you saying the plan all over again, kind of thing. So maybe that's why you don't like it, but still, I enjoyed it, and for God's sakes, they brought back Jameson. Spoiler alert.
So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast this week. We will talk to you again next week when we discuss Spider-Man Far From Home.
So, did you notice that Fury and Talos were staring at that other Scroll's junk for like 3 seconds? Did you notice that, or is that just me?